Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words, and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over.
Welcome to the Behavioral View. I am your host for today. I am Dr. Carrie Millico, and I am the Director of Clinical Programming at CentralReach. And today we have a super awesome show for you. And today we have 3 special guests. But before I get to them, I would like my co-host to introduce herself, Nissa.
Hi there, my name is Nissa Van Etten. I'm the Director of Assessment and Clinical Training here at CentralReach.
And then we have a blast from the past, Dr. Rick Kubina.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be back. My name is Rick Kubina, and I am the Director of Research at CentralReach.
It's so great to have you with us. And with that, we have our special guests coming with us from Morningside.
I'm Kent Johnson. I'm the founder and director of Morningside Academy. I'm an educational psychologist of the behavioral analytic persuasion. And I teach a summer institute each summer. In 1997, Rick was one of the students who came out to the summer institute. So that's how old I'm getting. So it's great to have Rick here. He's been a great pal through all those years. And another great pal is the guy who's going to be taking the mantelpiece of Morningside in our slow but steady transition. That's Andrew.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Andrew Kieta. I'm the Associate Director at Morningside. I came to Summer Institute in 2008 and then just kind of stayed around. And then, 15 years later, here I am. So it's really, really exciting to be here with all of you. So thanks for having us.
Okay, so we're going to start off our episode today of just kind of like a soft opener here. We're sitting here talking about academics and education. So I want all of us kind of share kind of personal experiences about a teacher that you had in, kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. Does anyone want to go first?
You want to go first, Kat?
Sure.
Yeah, cool.
Louise Shimshick. All right, Louise was my 4th grade teacher, and some of you heard my stories. Well, I'll try to be brief here. So when I was 9 years old, I started a kind of a tutoring service called in my fine neighborhood in Milford, Connecticut, called Morningside. So I was merrily tutoring kids from around the neighborhood, collected a dime an hour, and bought my 45s and albums with that. And anyway, Louise was my 4th grade teacher, and I'd already been working with kids for a year then, and she really took me under her wing, treated me like a junior colleague. I'll just never forget how good she was with me. I would go over to her home, and she would whip out all these worksheets she had developed over the years and give me them and the answer keys to go along with stuff I was working out with my kids, and I would help her correct papers. And so look where I am now, thanks to Louise. So she was my wonderful 4th grade teacher that I'll never forget.
Love that.
Yeah, I can't really beat that one. That's really good.
Yeah, seriously. 4th grade teacher that paved the way to naming your school and your whole career trajectory. Yep, you win, Kent.
I had a really important 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Medill, who was just really, really kind and really friendly. And I got every report card, probably like 2nd grade through 6th grade, said needs to exercise self-control. I was a little fidgety and a little touchy, and like if there was any downtime, I filled it with things that most teachers probably didn't want me filling their time with. But she kind of got that like from day one, and I just remember, like I remember even then sensing like, oh, she's always finding stuff for me to do, and so I was always like had work at the level that I was working at, so I wasn't bored. I had stuff to do. She was just always really kind, and like one of many teachers I had like that who just made me love school and made me want to do this work.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll go. Mrs. Glenn, Joanne Glenn, she was so I'm going high school. She was, I had the fortunate experience because she started off with, it was algebra 2, then trig, then calc. Cause we moved schools, she was at King and then we went to Wharton and no one was teaching trig and then no one was teaching AP calc. And so I was fortunate to have her for all of those. And I credit her to I was always good with math. I was in the gifted classes and honors and stuff like that. But man, she really, I think really fine-tuned my math skills and not only that, but she got me to just think in a way with that numbers made sense, being able to think about these hard problems, just everyday practical explanations. And then also just as a human, she was this nice balance of because a math teacher, you have to follow certain rules, right? Like line up your problem this way, because if not, you're going to drop a negative sign somewhere, and your whole problem is going to come up with the wrong answer. And that's kind of how she was as a human. That she has this nice balance between these are boundaries, and you step out of the boundaries, and that's not cool. But I'm also a compassionate human, and I remember I don't know. I was getting written up because my skirt was too short, but she was like, yeah, that's kind of bullshit, And it was really nice that I felt as someone who was just a rule follower, and I didn't think that my skirt was too short, and she didn't make me feel bad about it. And we continued a friendship even as I grew up. And she came and talked to my staff at my learning center in Florida and talked about different ways of teaching, because she is a principal of a e-learning high school and just won Principal of the Year award in Florida. I want to say last year or 2 years ago. So yeah, she's just kicking ass and taking names, and she was one of my favorite teachers in high school. So it's so awesome to see her career path, but also identifying the influence that she had over me. So.
Cool.
Wow, great stories. I don't know if I can match them. My teacher, I'll jump in here, is Miss Amy Gartner, and I had her from 3rd through 5th grade. So similar to Story Carrie, where she kind of moved up to fill the 4th grade need and then 5th grade need. And my memories of her are so salient because I was I was not confident as a child. So with that lack of confidence came a lack of confidence in my academic ability, especially in math. I'm still terrible at math. My kids are all really phenomenal at math, and it definitely does not come from me. My husband works with them. He spends a lot of time, and they have tutors, but she supported me and made me feel confident in school, and as well as, whenever you had to engage in that reading out loud. So that was one activity I really disliked as a student was, you'd kind of skip read across the classroom, and, Rick might read a paragraph and then it would jump to Nissa. I always had so much anxiety when it was my turn. And early on, between the ages of 4 and 7, I had a stutter. And I went to speech therapy for my stutter, and I had a really hard time with CHs in the ch and the sh. And so if it was a sentence with those letters in there, I knew I was about to freeze. And she just supported me and gave me the confidence, where reading and stuttering kind of fell to the wayside, and reading in that group model wasn't as anxiety provoking. So lots of great memories there.
Cool.
That's nice. I think that there's something to say about that continuity of care, right? Where you have that teacher that goes with you throughout the years.
Yeah.
My parents were practicing Catholics, so they sent me to a Catholic school. It was St. Joe's was the school I went when I was young. And I had a teacher who I first met her in second grade, and then I had her in fourth grade. And when I was young, I was what they call back then hyperactive. And I mean, I was as hyperactive as you can imagine.
I can't imagine that. You are cool as
Yes,
a cucumber, Rick.
I couldn't sit still. I'd be walking around all the time. Back then they would give you, I mean, they do it now. They would give you medication,
Mm-hmm.
and they would give you, stimulant because it had a paradoxical effect. At any rate, I was not what I would consider a good kid, and I'm sure my classmates would say the same thing. And my teacher was incredibly patient and kind. And, I can remember many instances where, were I with a stricter nun, I probably would have gotten a little more trouble. But when I left fourth grade, you would get these little presents, and they were like religious cards. So I still have it to this day. It's like this little angel on the front, and on the back, she wrote, "Blessings, goodwill, and grace as you grow into a young man." And it was just so touching to think that here's this person who I was a little shit the entire time, but yet she deeply cared for me. She showed me such great kindness, and those are things that you just will never forget for as long as you live. And there's no way you can repay that kindness.
Mm-hmm.
All you could do is pay it forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
You even remember the phrase that she
Yeah.
wrote in your card.
Yeah,
That's
I
so
do.
cool. That's so cool.
Well, this is such a great interlude into our conversation for today. Kent and Drew, you all are at Morningside, and Morningside, I'm sure, is leaving legacies, stories that, are touching students' hearts as like those that we're sharing today. And Morningside takes a different approach to education than kind of the traditional model that's out there in the district. And I was wondering, maybe we can just start our conversation with kind of sharing us, what's Morningside like, what's special about Morningside, and kind of talking to us about the Morningside model.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, Morningside really it's kind of, I think of it as two different entities. There is like the families in Seattle. We are a small community school that serves the function of getting kids caught up who are struggling in school. So kids with ADHD, executive functioning disorders, general learning disorders. They're the kids that we talk about as the forgotten 40%. So kids who fall through the cracks of American education. They're kind of kids who float through and get C's and D's. They don't really like school. They often, they're average to above average IQ kids who just, the large group learning format isn't working for them well. So that's kind of what we're known as here. But then we have this whole other entity that you all know about where we're a laboratory school. So we're investigating new curricula, best practices in instruction and practice. And when we find stuff that works, then we take it out to schools all over the U.S. And I think what we find more and more is like, there's elements of what we do that are in schools everywhere, right? It's like bringing it all together, though, is a challenge. And I think the thing that sets Morningside apart, at least this approach, is that we take kind of a right side up approach to teaching. So like rather than trying to teach something because a kid is 10 years old and that's what you learn at 10, we're like, we're going to teach all the skills necessary so that you can do that thing on your own or do that with little instruction. Right? So we kind of have the same general goals as most of general education, but we just think there's definitely a different route to get there.
Awesome. So would you say then in Seattle, the location in Seattle, the purpose is to get them back into the schools in the neighborhood?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the average kids here are probably 2 to 3 years. So most kids come in, they get caught up. They not just caught up in reading, writing, and math, but they also get caught up in their learning skills, self-advocacy skills, problem-solving skills, psychological skills, to the point where they're ready to go back. So there's often families who are like, all right, time to go. You're ready. Like, you're going to be successful. You don't need to be here. But then there is another, 30, 40% of kids who are comfortable here because they've been successful, often for the first time in school. and then they want to stay. So we have a middle school program that's designed to take kids who are at or above grade level and get them further ahead and really prepare them with even more skills like study skills, advanced organizational repertoire, so that they can be effective in high school, college courses, etc. So it's kind of a mix. Like, our goal is to get all these kids back at some point. It's kind of just a question of when the families are ready to go back and where are they going.
Gotcha. And then your laboratory school, then conversely, right, is more about then different approaches, like using this model all around the world, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, we cast a pretty wide net in terms of what we're looking at that already works. So really, like, we want to find out, stuff that looks good on paper. The data looks good behind a curricula, teaching procedure, etc. What does it actually look like in a messy classroom with 12 kids who can't remember their backpacks and they leave their shoes everywhere? Like, what does this actually look like? How do teachers actually implement this with the population that we're working with? So it's a wide range of things we're working on. It's new curricula, both things like out of the direct instruction world, but also just stuff that comes out of worlds that behavior analysts don't usually access. Like, for example, we've been spending 7 years now on Singapore primary mathematics, which is far away from direct instruction as you can imagine, but there's some really cool stuff there and some really good data. So our work is like, how do we come up with the procedures and the structures to make those programs work? And then when we do that, how do we go train teachers around the country and increasingly internationally to do the same work?
I remember the Singapore math. We had a mentor assigned to us when we started Singapore math, and he was always amused.
He was very amused.
He had never worked with behaviorists doing something. He was just always kind of chuckling at the kinds of questions that we had, and he'd come in at certain points and he'd say, I know more procedures here. We need more procedures here. And so we would just come up with, but not in what our procedures are, compared to the people in the direct instruction world, in the core of the direct instruction world. We're kind of loose with direct.
Right.
We're not, the picture perfect videos of the person who's swinging their arm at just exactly the right angle at the book as they snap their fingers for the responses. So we're a laboratory school, but we're informal. All the kids call us by our first names. We're really in the Seattle kind of thick of the kind of progressive community there, and make this fit in that culture, which is totally the kind of culture I want to be in anyway. So our, it's about what works. Like, what is what we're doing effective, and if not, what's the data say, and what might we try out for an intervention? And we just cook up interventions left and right. Some of them take hold and spread across classrooms, and others are the teachers become teacher scientists in the sense that they're always trying out something, collecting data, and revising it if it's not working. So that whole quality control ethic is just living moment to moment in our classrooms. So that might be the most insightful look at what we do, rather than coming to see kind of a standard, reading mastery is here, So we kind of, reading mastery is here because it offers quite a few advantages in terms of teaching in an orderly fashion, but we go, it's not reading mastery by the book. It's reading mastery with our tier 2 kids, and how to make that work, combined with a whole measure of fluency on everything that we do. So it's not worth teaching if it isn't worth making fluent. And there's just that combination is those are our hallmarks. But then we go off in other tangents like cognitive strategy, instruction, and all kinds of stuff that the behavioral world isn't familiar with. That, because being an educational psychologist, that's my upbringing. It's educational psychology, not behavior analysis. So I didn't get a degree in behavior analysis. I got a degree in educational psychology from a wide range of points of view of professors, even in graduate school. But my bent was behavior analysis. So I looked at everything through that kind of lens, and I had good behavioral supports. I had great mentors who were behaviorists, but also other people taught me a lot about what's valuable to do in a classroom besides behavior analysts. So I think it has more of a bigger picture view of what a good school ought to look like.
Yeah. And I think that that's probably, that's something that we talk often about, Nissa, Shannon, and I, in a lot of our podcasts, even just for clinicians who are in behavior analysis, just like sometimes the lack of going outside of the bubble, right?
Yeah, the insularity that behavior analysis is prone to is, and for in our history, we were given a lot of criticisms, and people mistreated us, I would say, back in the 60s and 70s, especially. But I think we got defensive, and that sometimes that posture remains that keeps us from looking outside of our own world, of our own insular world.
So that's what you think, that's why we built up walls and said only read our journals, only stay within kind of our
That's
own.
Some of it, as Ogden Lindsley would say to me, there's 40 reasons for everything. So don't think you're going to find one. But certainly that is a main factor in the history of where the field is now. Is it's got a professional status with certain populations that gives a different feel of the behavior analysis and the behavior analysis that I grew up in.
Sure.
There's fewer of us doing work with kind of general ed and tier 2 even than they used to be. If you tracked the number of papers devoted to the different populations or different technologies over time in, say, JIBA, it really has, someone ought to make a graph.
Yeah.
We could see. Yeah, it's really different now. We carry on with our stuff, and a lot of people are interested in our stuff. Not a lot of resources in our field for people who are interested in certain areas like general education. Not a lot of resources for people to learn how to do that well. So so if we're going to, I don't want to, the critique of our field, is, I do it lovingly. I mean, I am a behavior analyst. I couldn't imagine another way of looking at my world. All aspects of my world, I look that way. But we have some improvements. There's always a possibility for improvement. So,
I'd like to bring you back based off of what you just said and ask both of you a question that I'm sure people listening to this can appreciate. You talked about working with Singapore math. You talked about comprehension, advanced cognitive strategies. It's easy to count math facts. 3 + 3, here's how we count it. What's your process for when you're working with these skills that could be way more complex than just some kind of simple response? What's the process look like? How's it developed? How is it iterated? And how might people, could people follow that process?
You want to give a...
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I think the most useful tool, the most important thing to learn to do this work well is understanding what we call component composite analysis. But I know there's other terms floating around. But that's really like the kind of the core of this is realizing like what is the hierarchy of skills that we're going to teach, starting from those more easy to, I guess, understand and count, like math facts, building up to more complex things like solving word problems, two-part word problems using fraction computation, which seems more complex, but really isn't. And when we look at how the skills build in the hierarchy from tool to component to composite, it allows us to figure out like what are we counting at each one of those levels? Like what are the behaviors we're trying to build, and then also what are the curricula that we're selecting to teach each of those things. And a lot of the work here is what we find is by focusing on some of those, I guess, simpler behaviors early on, it does make it easier to teach the more complex behaviors. So we tell teachers a lot, like it should be in theory easier to teach algebra than it should be to teach, a toddler to count. Like you're not starting with anything with a brand new learner. The learner learning algebra, it's just another addition, right? So by Ken always talks about like we're trying to seed the repertoire. We're trying to build these really broad, fluent bases of skills in which we can combine behavior to come up with all kinds of new things.
So a lot of the middle school practices are just good practices for good middle school teachers.
Yeah.
And if you do a good job of tracking your composites as you're teaching your components,
Mm-hmm.
you see these composites like number of two-step word problems in fractions. You start seeing them emerge as long as you've got good calibrated counting. You don't want to have problems that are wildly different in terms of the number of words in them,
Yeah.
so that when you're actually charting them, there's some semblance between one problem and the next. But otherwise, these problems start being students start performing well on them with tips and quips.
Yeah. The
Just
kids
like
often start outperforming the measurement. Like the combinations of new behavior happen so fast that it's often like we don't even have a chance to measure it because it just shows up in the classroom. We're like, oh, there it is. And it's like compounding on top of itself over and over again.
So the minimum guidance that the constructivists talk about, this ideal world where there's this minimal guidance and students are just discovering things all along the way, and that needs to be engineered. So most of those teachers have this ideal that they never meet when they actually are again on the ground level in a classroom, and we think we can. We have methods of deconstructing what to be discovered that allow the student to discover with some pointed engineered component prerequisites that make that happen. So it is kind of meeting the ideal of the constructivist. The constructivist ideal is met through behavioral means. Let me put it that way. And fortunately, we have enough kids that stay around with us. That's another thing in our field is that when our kids get better and better, then they don't need behavior analysis anymore, right? They don't need ABAs, and that's really a bad plan. We have even more to offer when they so-called don't need us, because there's a whole other way of guiding them to be good learners that we don't get a chance to teach most of our kids across. Most behavior analysts never get that opportunity because the kids are done with the service.
This makes me, now I have like two questions, but it's going to take me into two different avenues. So Andrew, one thing that made me think is that like when you were saying that like the learners get to be, they're kind of outperforming the measurement, right? Like, do you get to the point where you're like, we are now freeing you up from that micro level of analysis to where you're like kind of looking at more meso level, like macro level?
I don't know that we ever free kids out of the micro level. Like the day-to-day precision teaching is going to happen no matter what. What we find is that there's less pinpoints or less time devoted to each of those pinpoints as kids move further up the curriculum ladder. Because they hit fluency on the components, then when they start doing fluency practice on a composite, they don't need much time to hit a frequency aim. So it's not necessarily that there's less, there's not that there's less micro pinpoints, there's just less time spent on those, which actually I think means for us more time and more analysis at the meta level, the progress monitoring level, where we're like looking for the emergence of all these composites. And that's really important because we do a lot of teaching. And the teachers are in the data like this. They're right in day to day, and they often don't even get to see the combinations and these new emergences because they're so, that's their work is day to day focusing on these various repertoires they're building. So for us who are doing the assessment work, we get to kind of see it show up, and we'll go to the classroom and be like, we don't have to do this anymore. And we're getting the composite skill. Now we're going to focus on practice on that, and now we'll start assessing to see what new composites emerge.
Love that. And then getting into those higher order skills, so many, like we have a lot of listeners, and Kent, you alluded to this, a lot of the field is working with, children or individuals with autism. It's like an industry now, but we have a lot of listeners who are in school settings, and they have been tasked to like deal with problem behavior or, RTI with a particular tier. And yet they want to get into more of those higher order skills. Like how can we like best, navigate those waters while we have behavior analysts in the district? And let's say they get the training, they get the competency, but it's more about working within the system of saying like, I actually think that we have a way that we can influence these more sophisticated skills, but yet the system is saying, no, just stay with these lower level skills. I want you dealing with problem behavior and language acquisition. Like so you guys get to deal with these fun, sophisticated skills where a lot of behavior analysts don't get to play in that play.
And they don't know how to quite do that. See, that's not their background. So the schools are mostly correct when they say you're a behavior analyst, so you don't know how to. I'm not going to talk to you about teaching composition in middle school.
Sure.
Why would you have anything to say about that? That's not what you do. And they most of the time will be correct. They wouldn't have the people, while they may want or wish they could get more into instruction and complex objectives, even simple objectives like how do you teach a kid to write a persuasive paragraph in grade 3? I mean, that's still not something that behavior analysts could go in and give tips for. So I think it goes back to our own training. I think there's a lot of people in our field who would like to have that experience. They need more courses like the kind that, Jessica teaches at Western, Rick teaches, has taught these courses. They're not out there. No. People come to the Summer Institute to learn some of that, but in 3 weeks, you're not going to learn a lot of it. So I think it's a gap in our training and mentoring of our students. That
I could absolutely jump in here because I am a graduate of the Chicago School when it was under Dr. Charles Mervitz, and we had 2 courses at that time. This was 16 years ago, so I will say I took 2 courses. Michael Fabrizio taught one, and Dr. Greer taught the other. So we were charting, we were learning component composite analysis. That was, nearly 2 decades ago. If you had me go in now and work on those skill sets, I have not used them in any capacity since I graduated. I used them in my first year out as a behavior analyst, but since then, it isn't something that's in my daily practice. So I would need an entire course as well as some competency levels. But I agree in that is a huge gap in the current educational structure for behavior analysts. And these future behavior analysts who are looking to take these courses, they don't even know these historical figures like Lindsley and the chart. I'm teaching at another university now where they are required to use Precision X, and I do require some chart discussions, but it is very not fluent. Yes, and it's a requirement, not something that they actually follow and believe in. And we have some of those discussions in the course as to why it does support their acquisition of these terms as SAFNEDs. But it's a really, I don't want to say a dying component of what's in coursework, but it's almost like we need to revive it and bring it back.
do we think it's like a chicken and egg situation? Like, it's like there isn't a demand and therefore people aren't getting the training, the competencies and stuff like that. And then at the same time, it's like, you know, they're not getting the competency because there isn't a demand. Like, I feel like we can go back and forth because it's like, we can look at the other area of behavior analysis that is booming, that is growing. And the minute that there was money behind it, like, then that's where the flock went, right? I think as we see in public education or even, I mean, like, you could just look at the public realm, is that if there was more backing and funding or even if insurance was paying for goals that were related to academic growth, like if you put that in a treatment plan and say like, hey, I'm just trying to catch them up so that he can go to kindergarten, and you're working on letter sounds, that'd be nixed from your treatment plan, right? The insurance companies wouldn't pay for that. So even if it would bleed into a little bit of academics, maybe we can get some trainings and competency and like get into that realm, and that could be even showing up in graduate courses, stuff like that. But I don't know. I like wonder.
I think that's a good point, though. The division between, or the perceived division between like academic behavior and like social problem behavior is really problematic. And that's like in both, like whether you're working with insurance, right, where you can do academic behavior, or you're in a school setting in which it's like we only do academic behavior, you do the social behavior. That distinction, which is not meaningful, is a huge problem. And I think some behavior analysts who know a little bit about curriculum and instruction have some success being able to show, like in a public school setting, that by addressing academic behavior, like a lot of the social problem behavior falls off. It no longer has the occasion to show up. But I don't know that that's like a systematic approach.
Well, the end point of teaching any skill is a social context. So, and that really curtails our work. If you're working in academics, you don't bring the skills that you're teaching to full fruition in terms of how they occur in the family or in the neighborhood or in the social group. It gets chopped off like, oh, well, now we're outside of academics somehow. Where I'm much more of like a John Dewey guy here. This is a continuum that you go on. The greatest value is when the learner can apply on demand in various different contexts what they've been taught. And if we just curtail that too much by this artificial division that Andrew's talking about, it's not going to happen. So, that's why you hear people who are moderately educated or undereducated talk about, oh, that's school learning. And it's so telling when they say, oh, that's school learning. Meaning that, and that's not relevant to real life. And you hear this in the working class communities that I've been in the inner cities all the time. There's this big distinction, like you going to school is some kind of a hazing process, and make you a strong person or something. I don't know, but we want to take this stuff all the way to the where it belongs, which is in a social context. So that's difficult, and so we try our best to make the situations as lifelike as they can be for the student. Now, a lot of the people middle school and high school teachers start lecturing about, well, you'll learn the value of what I'm teaching you when you get older, and this whole thing, what about right now? This is valuable right now. If it's not, then wait till later to teach or learn it. It's just it's not sensible to me in the big picture of behavior analysis in everyday life. I wish more of us could get there.
I love that.
in our work.
Gonna pause for a second. Our first secret word, we're a little late to this, is evening, EVENING, evening. But didn't mean to interrupt our flow. Sorry.
And what does the secret word do?
For people listening to get their CEUs.
Oh.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, no. Kent, I want you to now.
That's not my world. I forget that word.
Yes.
Got it.
So let's shift this a little bit into teacher training then. Because if we're having a hard time getting it into the systems, and we're kind of talking about training anyways here. Let's talk about like teachers, right? So now we have teachers who are eager, wanting to use this. They see the value for their learners, their students. Who are the teachers that you guys find to be the best candidates to implement the work that you all are doing?
That's a good question. It depends. So here at the school at Morningside, it's interesting how things ebb and flow kind of over time. So we will have years in which we're hiring and bringing in a lot of like classically trained general education teachers or special education trained teachers who tend to be a little bit more behaviorally oriented. So we'll do that, and we'll find that one of the nice things about working with that group of people is that their orientation to the classroom is the group. Right? Like when they sit in front of a classroom, they're teaching to all of the children at once. And that's the norm. Sometimes to a fault, right? In gen ed settings, often it's like it's so broad that individual children's like the specific differences, specific needs are not accounted for, right? And that's how a lot of our kids fall through the cracks. So we'll have those teachers, and we'll be really into that. And then we'll be like, you know what? We're getting too broad. We're not getting in deep enough individually. We'll bring in teachers who are behavior analysts or have more of a background in psychology. And we're like, they're a little bit more focused on the individual child. And that goes well. And then we'll get this pattern of being like, we're too one-on-one these days. We got to get back to groups. So it's always kind of like a give and take here of what the mix is. And right now it's probably about 50-50 people who are teachers who have more of a gen ed background versus a behavioral analytic background. But the teachers who learn this model are people who, like one thing with classroom teachers is like you have to be comfortable standing up in front of a classroom. Right? That's a more challenging thing for me to teach than it is to teach specifics of how to deliver instruction, specifics of how to plot data on a standard acceleration chart. Those are easier for me to train than to get somebody who's just comfortable, has good rhythm in the classroom, feels comfortable being around 12 noisy, unorganized kids at once. So our teachers, when they come to us, they do a tryout lesson. So they come, they try out, and they may try out 2 times, 3 times. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for like, what is your command like in the classroom? What's your analysis? It doesn't have to be like really tight, but like, are you responsive to the students' responses? Can you change what you're teaching in the moment? And then we'll give teachers feedback. And sometimes we'll say, you know what, that was all right. Here's what you can do better. Why don't you come back and teach again next week? If they can implement feedback really well, then that's a really good sign for a Morningside teacher. Because that's really important here is that teachers can receive coaching. They get coached a lot. Like first year teachers have a dedicated coach in their classroom 4 to 5 days a week. Observing, giving feedback, active feedback in the session. So it's really important that they can take feedback and can implement it right away.
And that's our luxury at the lab school. When we go out on the road, we don't have that. Those are the teachers that we're teaching.
Right.
It's not like we're in a selection mode anymore. So that's more that's challenging to appeal to the teachers that we meet in the school that we are going to.
Yeah. And I'll say in the shortish time that I've been doing this work in public school, so probably 10-ish years, like I've noticed a pretty significant change in teachers being more and more open to what we're talking about. I never have teachers who say like, oh, you're a behavior analyst. Yeah, because I don't talk about that. Like I go in and we're talking about evidence-based instruction and people are like, great, we're looking for tools. And I think that one thing working in our favor is that there's a lot of stuff that precision teachers and behavior analysts have been doing for a long time that is kind of slowly leaking into schools. So like frequency is the measurement for oral reading fluency, for example. So like most schools in the country now have time-based measurements. Like that's not totally new. What they're finding is that they have these measurements that the kids are not they're not successful with those measures because they don't have the teaching practices. So they're like, well, what do we do? How do we build these faster performances, these more fluent performances? So I noticed more and more buy-in with around things like fluency. And also like Anita Archer's work on explicit instruction, that's out there. Like the I do, we do, you do framework is everywhere. Like not just in the US and schools, right? Internationally, everyone's like, oh yeah, I know that. I know I do, we do, you do. So that's really cool because we're like, oh great, well let me tell you a little bit more about that framework and how to do that a little bit more systematically. So I find it less and less the case that teachers hear what we have to say and they're like, what are you talking about? That's not the case. More and more, it's like, oh, okay, well, I want more of how to do each of those things.
Yeah, when my children now are 7, 9, and 11, and when they entered in elementary school, it was refreshing to see some of the things come home that were, obviously not all of it was great, and it still isn't, to put it lightly. But yes, reading stuff every week is a passage that comes home that is time-based, as well as sight words that are time-based and math problems that are time-based. So, like there's little elements of that where I was like, man, when I was in grad school, that wasn't happening. Right. So it is nice to see that kind of creep in.
And that's the delight for me is to, we had such a behavior analysis. So when I say we had such a tremendous impact on classroom management, it's just spread like wildfire. And there were people that got technologies into schools everywhere. And we've lost that in our field by our specialization. We don't have, and certainly don't have that in instruction. When it takes people like Anita Archer to go around and do the hustling to get this stuff in place. But if we could all have those of us who are interested in education and instruction, could have a plan for wherever we go, that we're saying similar things to all the teachers that we're meeting. We could have a spread of effect, like people would start saying, oh yeah, I know about peer practice or peer coaching, when we're collecting frequency. That's not something that a teacher would be averse to saying, or they aren't they're more interested than I think some of us think they are in learning some effective tool.
Do you think it's more of like a carrot versus a stick approach? Like we needed more of an ambassador to like communicate with that other world, right? And it's more of like, hey, how can we come together, build a bridge, have both of these communities talk together? What are things that I can learn about you can learn about us, and we are building this together, as opposed to you're wrong, we're right, learn from me, I am the expert, because I feel like sometimes behavior analysts tend to have that reputation.
Yes, well, we're top down. We have a top down style. We're control freaks, and so
yes,
and in some ways that's highly valuable. That's why we got where we got.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But we need to know when to dish it out and when to kind of hang back. I love my time when we get in a public school, I'll go in classrooms that are not why we're there. Go and sit in an 8th grade social studies class, and then give the teachers some tips about what I might have to offer them, and it's very well accepted. It doesn't have to be. We can do this. We can, and if we are all doing that and all saying the same things, calling it the same thing, then it could be like where Wesley Becker was able to do with classroom management in our field. I mean, Jabba was just chock full of him and his students and all that they brought to classrooms everywhere, not behaviorally oriented people at all. I think
Uh,
that's, go ahead.
gotta squeeze in the second secret word, rain, RAIN, rain. Ken, and with working with you, I imagine that in these conversations that you're having, you're using their language, right? You're speaking their language. You're not coming in with jargon and forcing them to use your language or anything like that. This is a very, again, like, words that you always like to use, you're giving out strokes, right? Like you're being like, oh man, I like what you did there. And
Yeah.
oh, have you considered this? I thought maybe there may have been an opportunity for this, or like kind of gentle feelers. Like you're a person who makes people feel good when they're around you. And I can imagine that, like, when you are in that social studies classroom observation, you're not then afterwards have a laundry list that's 10 things that they could do differently, right? And make that teacher feel like that, even though she's been teaching for 20 years, this was her first day on the job, right? Like it's a different experience.
And you can call it a name. If I have a particular procedure that I'm talking about, I can say, and we call it this, and they can learn a word, a term, but I'm talking to them about what I saw. Remember when these two students here, when they were sharing something related to what you were teaching them, and how could that be incorporated more? And you looked delighted about that. Well, here's the kind of way that you could bring that more systematically into your practices. They don't have like a plan. The class just moves forward somehow with the book that they have, and they have general, their lesson plan is like this long, and it says really general things, in it. And they appreciate, a little more structure, a little more texture. That I've found. Not too much. You got to be a good persuader, though. That's you want to make that your business, to be an ambassador and to be a persuader. I think that's, if we could all do more of that, we could make the world a better place.
So Kent and Andrew, I have been in the College of Education since this is what we're talking about for now. This is my 30th year, if you can believe that. And I hear a lot of things around the College of Education. And one of the things I hear that is debated, some people will say that teaching is an art, and other people will say teaching is a science. So I'm going to ask you two, which one is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both. Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much both. I think that the design of a curriculum, the design of instruction, the analysis work that goes into figuring out what works and doesn't work, that scientist practitioner model that Ken talked about earlier, that's all the science. But the art is everywhere, right? It's the way in which all that work is delivered, right? It's the teacher's presence in the classroom. You come here, and I think people are always surprised at the differences between our 10 faculty members. You walk into one classroom and it's really fast paced and it's active and teachers are fast. And you go in other rooms and it's slow and it's methodical. And like, we encourage all of that. There's a lot of variety in the way that this is actually presented, right? In the way that you actually are interacting with children, like on a moment to moment basis. That is very much the art of what this work is. So it's kind of grounded in science, but if you talk to our teachers here, the teachers at Morningside, at the lab school, would still say this is just as much an art as a science.
And that bucks up against the research model that our field is built on too, because then you're not all doing implementing the independent variable in the same way. Like there's differences, so you have to be able to describe those differences more generally, and then that's subject to critique about your research method of your paper. This stuff doesn't get, when you get more art, the more artful you get about implementing a practice, the less likely you'll get your write-up published, because it doesn't fit that model. So we've got some tension between research and practice that when the research method wins, then everybody is a little is pretty robotic about about implementing that procedure. And that kind of runs up against the notion of doing things in a social context. We're all human beings interacting with each other. It's not like this thing that comes down like the pellet comes down the slot in the Skinner box. That's not, that should be more of a metaphor for us. And there should be more avenues for, when the Journal of Behavior Analysis and Practice was coming out, I was hopeful that that would be a little more like what practitioners are doing in the way that I'm describing it. And it's turned out to be like a baby Jabba. And I think that's maybe we need a baby Jabba, and so that people can grow up and put their paper in the big Jabba. But we also need something else. So, that's just, I don't have a solution, but that's a kind of running commentary on the tension points there between research and practice.
No, but I think that that's a really important point, is that in practice, by definition, you don't have those controls. And it is the beauty of the art, or the variability of the difference of teachers and how they show up, where one is spitting it out like gung-ho, and the other one over here is slow, methodical, massaging the instruction in their classroom. Whereas if this was a controlled study, the delivery of instruction would have been controlled for, and they would have been delivering those cues at an equal pace, right? But the beauty, though, of your all's model is that both of those teachers work, right? And that's like, you can go super high-paced, energetic, tons of energy, tons of instruction this within a matter of a few seconds, and really chill, lay back, but deep, thorough, and quality. I mean, both are super quality, but two different styles, both producing great outcomes.
That's right, style.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Style is the art, and it's based on the scientific practice, right? But there's style consideration. Mm-hmm. That's the variable features that we need to respect more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the style is really the teacher matching their social repertoire to the 12 or 13 or 25 different social repertoires all in their classroom. Like if they're trying to deliver the instruction the exact same way, that's not actually taking into account, the 25 different repertoires in front of me. So I need to match the kids where they are. So, that takes a lot of analysis. Like teachers can often, like after the fact, kind of identify that's what they were doing. But like in the moment, like that's the art, right? They're quickly identifying who the learners are, how they match their pace to those learners, how they support each and every one of those kids while also remaining in a group context, not getting sidebarred one-on-one with 12 different kids.
And I wonder how many times research has failed because the clinician didn't have, or the researcher, let me rephrase, didn't have the autonomy to change based upon the needs of the participant at that space and time, right? Because like a good clinician is like, oh, wait, no, I need to show up differently today because of how my learner shows up right here and now. But as a researcher, you're like, oh no, the paper says to do it like this today. And you're like, oh, this is not going to go down well, right? But yet, like, that you would do it differently as a clinician.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it would be publishable in that journal that you're talking about, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm curious, based off of where this conversation's going. I've spent more and more time on the technology and looking at how that's integrated and how that can profoundly change the way we deliver instruction. And I'm just wondering what you all think about where technology is going and how will not just behavior analysis, but all the good instruction, precision teaching, instructional design, all the things that you all have spent years studying, continually improving, and you continually do that because that process never ends. How do you see what you're doing in terms of technology? And technology can be anything. Robots are showing up in the classroom. Robots are showing up everywhere. Avatars are showing up everywhere. Just these are just some examples.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that for us, we look at teaching still as a social experience more than anything else, right? So like the delivery of the instruction, the work with the children for us will always be driven by the teacher, right? Forever. We don't, like, the last thing we want is kids sitting in front of a bank of devices, like doing their learning there. We want the teacher interacting with children, children interacting with each other. We want this kind of messy social learning atmosphere where we see the use of technology, specific tools that teachers can use, but also like increasingly the students can learn how to use. So I think we're spending a little more time thinking about and talking about that with kids too. It's like, how do we teach you to recognize each of these, all the stuff out there as individual tools that you can use for certain purposes, rather than like all encompassing things you have to you have to use just because they exist. Like being selective in the tools you use, the tech tools you use, to help you with writing a composition, for example, or doing research on a topic. I think that's really important. I think a lot of kids are kind of overwhelmed with the amount of stuff out there and don't really know how to be selective in what they're doing and why they're doing it. So we think that's really where we'll be spending a lot more time in, going forward. I think from the teacher's perspective, I think technology gives us a lot of opportunities for better, faster data analysis too. I think that's one area. When we were online for COVID, we struggled with our charting stuff. Still went really well, but we were still just doing PDF charts where we were literally going on and annotating because we do so much with them. We were like, this is the challenge for us that we want. Like our kids do all the charting. Our teachers interact with the chart more to make decisions. They're not dropping a ton of the dots. And we teach the kids right away how to do that. So that's something where we see technology being able to help us more, I think, more than anything else. It's another tool that we can teach kids to use to make better decisions quicker.
Gotcha. Well, we are nearing our time, y'all. Do we have any last thoughts that we want to get in as we are wrapping up? Any last bits of wisdom that we want to drop? Any last things you've been dying to say in this conversation?
I hope more of us get involved in instruction, and I hope more of us get involved with taking this to the streets. That's really, there's so many behavior analysts who don't know much about instruction and what that really means. We have a very complex understanding of good instruction, and I wish more people had the opportunity to learn that on their journey to their degree. And I'm thankful that I bailed the college scene because I wanted to go take it to the streets, literally. I'm glad we have professors like Rick and you, Carrie, who can bring more to the classroom, the college classroom, in these areas. I think it's very important. How do we multiply ourselves?
I'll add to that. Like I think the importance of having demonstration sites is extremely valuable. Like I'm very thankful that Kent did all of this. Yeah. That we have this demonstration site here, and I know how much work it was. Like endless amount of work to make this happen, and it's incredibly valuable because when we go talk to teachers about this, they're always like, okay, all right, like I hear you talking about it, but then when they can actually come here and like sit in the classroom, or even when we can show videos, which are not contextual enough, but when people can just see what this looks like, they're like, oh, that's possible. They see some of the data, some of the outcomes that Morningside's produced over the years, and they hear about it, and they're like, that sounds nice. But like just being able to actually see it and have a chance to practice with kids in a classroom where this is happening is really valuable. I think I think part of like getting in the door more with places is people to actually see this work. They kind of otherwise it kind of sounds like, oh, we do this great thing, we're kind of scolding you for not doing it. The opportunity for them to actually get in and see what it looks like, and for them to realize that, like the kids that we're doing this with are not like finished products. These aren't kids who come to us like in thriving general ed students. So we can watch kids doing some incredible things, and teachers can see like how they got there. Like what's the roadmap, what's the process for developing these kind of learners.
Yeah, I think you can say so much to a teacher and you go, well, just do this, this, and this. And they're like, yeah, it's that easy. Sure, show me. But then when you show them, right, you say demonstration sites, where are they? How many? Like obviously Seattle, but I know that you guys have a lot of schools that are utilizing this model all over the place.
And they live and die. You can't throw in the towel because they don't last.
Well, you got politics involved, changes in leadership, funding. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah.
So those are all kind of given. So that's why the work is never done. You've got to maintain your collection of places to go visit, and that's changed dramatically over time.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That doesn't, some people get really frustrated by that and like, oh, after all that work, now that's not there. No, it's not there. And neither are you there anymore. So got it. And so now on to the next place. We're trying to get some Pennsylvania school districts now. That's
great.
Our goal, because that's an easier state than many to bring this work in, because there's a lot of buzz around Pennsylvania for some of this work that we do, and there's people who have stuff in place that we can refer to, and so that's our next. COVID put a big kind of brick wall for all of it. Now we're trying to get ourselves back in gear and get this more. But that's what we have to do. We have to go to a district. We're in Iceland now, right? So we got 2 schools in Iceland. So maybe that'll trickle down into Europe too. But they were like, yeah, let's go. Let's go.
Like that project, for example, that happened because people there put a lot of work and a lot of advocacy into making it happen, and people like worked within the system. And somebody spent time with us at our summer institute. I was able to get into one school and then got to become the vice principal, and was able to bring together other direct instruction, precision teaching people. So we want to do this like in mass. So it takes a lot of effort behind the scenes. People are always like, why aren't more schools doing this work? And I'm like, do you know how many people pitch a superintendent of a district on how their model is better than yours? Like it's endless. Yeah. So it takes like concentrated, persistent effort from a lot of people talking about, what are the alternatives and why would they work? And then having the ability to see that really, really matters. I think that teachers and school districts in general are often open. They're overwhelmed. Yeah. They have a lot of kids, a lot of work to do. So it's often not some like, oh, we don't want to do that. It's more of either we don't even know that that's out there. The vast majority of teachers we work with are not dismissive of this work. They're just ignorant of it. They have no idea that we're even out here doing this kind of work. So I think that's more often the case than some like us versus them. It's much more of they're doing really hard work with a lot of kids in a lot of different systems. And in the U.S., in every school, we don't have a federal education program here. It's not, the federal government doesn't drive education. State governments don't really either. It's really at the local level. We are a huge, massively diverse country. So one of the beauties I think of this model, and to Ken's point, why we don't worry too much about it when it does die out, is that it looks so different in every place. Because this kind of goes back to the robotic delivery thing. Like the way things work in the lab school in Seattle do not work in general ed settings in Iceland. Mm-hmm. Like they are not delivering instruction the same way we are, and nor are they when we were doing work in like the rural schools in Hawaii. It's going to look different, and that's really important. So a lot of that stuff kind of lives on in a way that's sometimes hard to measure, but like we routinely get emails from teachers who are like, hey, I'm not at that school anymore. I moved to this state. I'm in this district. Can I get those math facts programs? I want to bring that back into my classroom. So it does live a lot amongst all the teachers that we train, and that's always really cool too.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your journey, sharing your knowledge with all of us and our listeners. our last secret word is obvious, OBVIOUS, obvious. It was not the obvious word out of our series. Do you all have, obviously, people to get some resources? You have your website, which we will drop in the show notes.
We have
links.
Morningside Press, which has a variety of instructional design books as well as curriculum for people who want to introduce new parts to their curricula. We have our new book that came out.
Yes.
Not new anymore. So
that's what we did for COVID. That gave Ken nice.
That was people said, "What did you do in COVID?" We wrote a book, so we had a 500-page
right
book.
here. Hey. Yes, that was.
Yeah, that was so much fun. Not COVID, but writing that book.
Hey, silver lining, right?
Yeah, always.
And
so this is fun. So you ever want to do this again on some more highly specific topics? That we might want to address. I'm enjoying this.
Awesome. Well, yes, I definitely know who to call. I'm glad you all had a good time. Yeah. We had a good time. Nissa, Rick, is there any thing that you guys want to plug? You guys got stuff coming up?
I just want to replug it.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
I'm just reopening the assessment mentoring cohort. Now that we have the combined assessments, we'll open that up in May and June for all of our base.
Rick?
Yeah. Well, I said I was going to replug whatever Kent and Andrew said. I own almost every product that I think Morningside has sold, and certainly a lifelong fan.
Yes. We've gotten all of our, we've purchased all of the stuff from Morningside Press, their instructional design materials. We use them to guide our instructional design work here at CentralReach. So thank you for providing that as a resource. Ken and Andrew, anything that you guys have upcoming? Obviously, the Summer Institute, so people can come and get training to learn more if they were inspired by this episode.
Yes, 2 or 3 weeks in July. Go to morningsideacademy.org and click on Summer Institute on the top, along the top markers on the homepage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the beamer, is it called?
Banner.
Oh, the banner.
The banner.
The banner. And read all about it and sign up. We'd love to have you come, and to Seattle is a wonderful place in the summer, I'll tell you.
It sure is.
Yeah, it's amazing. You spend the mornings teaching in the classrooms, and then in the afternoon you learn all about different aspects of this model. Then you go practice it the next day with kids, with coaching from classroom teachers, Morningside coaches, ourselves. So that's how I got turned on to this work. It's an amazing experience. So come to that. And we'll also be at ABBA and then the Precision Teaching Conference in Galway too.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Oh yeah. Rick and I.
Yes, we got the 2 keynotes right here. Kent and Rick, all stars. Well, thank you all so much for coming. This has been a lovely time, and we just appreciate your generosity.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, with that, we are out. Take care.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz, where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.